considers a person's many intersecting identities. So gender, age, cultural background, just to name a few. And these identities affect each person's experience of both privilege and discrimination. And these intersecting identities affect both people in an interaction or relationship. So, in some of the experiences that we have in this audience, it could be between a client and a clinician, between a teacher and student, or between a youth and a parent. So there really isn't any one solution or guidance that's going to fit all situations that you're going to fit. And that's why we really want to emphasize that it really requires us to be willing to be lifelong learners, which you obviously are because you're all here today. And today we'll offer guidance based on current best practices. But as Sarah said, neuroaffirming practices will continue to change and evolve. And so with that, I pass it over to Mac to help us stay nimble and reflective.
Alrighty, thanks, Angie. How we discuss people's neurodiversity is so important, as we discussed prior. But these early days are such a critical period for people to develop their self-schemas, and for family members to develop understanding of what's going on as that base for the way that they're going to understand it for the rest of their lives, based off of the new information that comes at them. For many people, diagnosis is a gift. For patients and their families, diagnosis is not just an explanation, it's an offering of self-understanding and a window into a community and a culture. And for this, it's seen as like an opportunity to optimize our neurodivergent potential. It's a ability to set supports in place that set high expectations and make sure that goals are not limiting, creating that self-image and self-understanding, and very, very importantly, creates the opportunity for an expectancy effect. Which is basically when one expects to have a certain outcome, they will, without realizing, change their actions and behaviors to actually increase the likelihood of reaching those outcomes. So if we're setting high goals, we're putting supports in place that are set to reach those high goals, we're setting people up for success. But if we see neurodivergence and we don't identify the potential that exists in the adaptations that can be set in place to reach full potential, we're letting people down. So for my own experience, when I was a child, I was diagnosed with multiple learning disabilities, and identified for neurodevelopmental disabilities, but was never followed through until my adulthood. These early interventions that were set in place for me based off of my diagnoses with dyscalculia and dyslexia and dysgraphia meant that I was able to access resources. I was given tutors. I was in groups for kids with learning disabilities. I was a member of a dyslexia support group, which was primarily for parents so they could share resources and what was working for their children. But for me, it gave me a space where I was the norm, and a space where I could understand myself and see myself in other people. And I didn't see myself as an outsider, or from what I had previously seen myself as, I saw myself as an idiot until I understood why I wasn't functioning the way that my classmates were. Next slide. Awesome. Again, not to minimize the challenges that children and families may be facing along the way, but we can introduce the concept of neurodivergence with more neutral and strengths-based alternatives, setting them up to understand themselves. How individuals and their families are introduced to this has such deep-rooted impacts. There's been studies that shown that people who have high self-stigma, this is a study relating to autism, correlates with reduced self-esteem, perceived capability, and initiation of reaching out for help. So if we're setting people up to think of themselves with language that is limiting, that is stigmatizing, we're not setting them up to think that they're worthy of support and capable of reaching it. yeah, we want to set them up with self-confidence and a robust schema that will support them through existing in a society that will often tell us that that we're functioning incorrectly, that we're strange, that we're wrong. And that's further stigmatizes autism. Next slide. Alrighty. So we're going to be talking about framing of neurodiversity and how it shapes the supports and self-perspective. So as I mentioned, my pediatric assessment for learning disabilities, I was sat after I was assessed, after everything had been done, we had another meeting after my 3-day assessment, and my psychoeducational evaluator sat me down and spoke to me, not about me. I was 9 years old, but she went in depth into where I was struggling, why I was struggling, and also where I was really excelling, where things could be set in place, where adaptations and supports could be put to address them. It was, if there was a discussion of something that I was struggling with, or something where, like, for example, I have the grammatical fluency of a third grader as a 23-year-old, where adaptations and supports can be set in place to address it immediately. It was never like, you have this and then just moving on. It was, you have this and we're going to set in place so you can have a computer in exams, so you can have a tutor to help you learn these things. All of these different explanations of supports. And she identified my strengths, and the light really switched off for me. My dad talks about how I just like changed as a child. One of the main reasons that I wasn't assessed for my neurodevelopmental disabilities was because I was able to excel in these areas, because I was explained so well what was going on, where there were differences, and I learned how to mask through a really in-depth explanation of what was going on. In my IEP, my psychoeducational evaluator also wrote, talk to Mac about her learning strengths and growth areas, help her to understand her significant talents and competencies, reasons for her difficulties, and what she can do to improve her performance in school. So there was always, like, this was one of the 3 key interventions that she set in place, was improving my confidence and understanding of myself, which set me up for a career in neuroaffirming and care and psychology. And this really exemplified an experience of neuroaffirming care for me. Alternatively, in my adult assessments, I did not have a wonderful experience, we'll say that. I was treated in an extremely medical model, very deficit-based, not based in any social experiences, not based in where there were possible positives coming out of my autistic and ADHD traits. Everything was framed very negatively, and there was no neutrality and absolutely no positivity. And even though I had asserted that I was not interested in medication because I just wanted to understand what was going on with my brain and why I was still struggling, even though I had all of these IEP, which is individualized education plans, set in place for me to be succeeding in university and in secondary school, post-secondary education. But I was still really, really struggling. And I wanted to understand what was going on so I could set up supports for myself, so I could have a community, and so I could have a resource for understanding myself. But instead, I was offered medication, even though I wasn't interested in it, and I'd said I wasn't interested in it. And there was no, no other resources, no services provided. It was, this is what I can give you. You don't want that. There's nothing else that's possible. So yeah, the difference that having that experience with an assessment would have made in my entire life trajectory, if that was the way that my early psychoeducational evaluation had happened when I was 9 years old, I can't imagine. I am so immensely thankful for having a neuroaffirming psychoeducational evaluator and having parents who are really, really neuroaffirming. So I was able to develop a lot of self-confidence and self-understanding instead of looking at myself as a problem to be fixed.
Thank you, Mac. Every time you share your stories, I learn something and it pushes me to keep changing my own practices. This is a quote from a family that I found very beautiful and I think also highlights what Mac shared with us. This parent shared that from an Indigenous perspective, I try not to use the word disability as I view my child and her differences as a beautiful gift from the Creator. Okay, so now we're going to get into our more interactive component. So get ready. And again, if you're thinking about an answer, you can type in the ellipsis into the chat and we'll know you're still thinking and typing. Okay.
Okay. So oh, are we good?
Let me know, Sarah, if
Okay.
that's we're good. Yeah.
Yep, no, it's you. Sorry.
All right, so we have some general guiding principles before we jump into all our activities. So in general, when we're speaking to children, youth, adults, families, clients, we really want to speak to clients and family members about their preferred language, with the caveat that depending on what our work is, we might be encountering families at different points in their journey. So you might meet some families who may not have had a preference in some areas yet, but that is also an opportunity for you to model neuroaffirming language. Another guiding principle is to describe specific behaviors that you're observing. So it's really important to try to be as specific as you can in describing what you see rather than focusing on what you think might be missing. At the same time, we want to avoid judgment of the behavior. So being specific in what you're describing helps with that as well, rather than adding a judgment to it. So, for example, I read in reports recently, someone used the word like someone scoffed or stormed off, but that's your interpretation of what happened. That's not you describing the behavior that happened. And so avoid your own interpretation of the meaning behind a behavior. Also avoid language that medicalizes neurodivergent or suggests that something needs to be fixed or cured. And also, rather than referring to treatment for a diagnosis, really think about, again, that specificity. What are you really recommending or suggesting? What you're really probably doing is wanting to describe the area of need or challenge that we are supporting through adaptations, therapy, and other supports, and you're not really treating a diagnosis. And so a lot of the information that we shared today, I know someone had asked about the slide. We've turned all this information into a toolkit because we wanted it to be something that you could use on its own and something that you can bring back and have discussions with your team, which is a bit harder if you kind of bring these slides with you without us and the stories that we're sharing along with the slides. So I will give you a quick preview of this toolkit. If you haven't received it, I'm sure you can reach out to the ACT team. I think it'll be posted on the website as well for you to download. Oh, I've lost my buttons. Share. So this is what the toolkit looks like. I'll just walk through it. So it has a lot of the definitions that we talked about today. The guiding principles. We designed each page so that for whatever your needs are, you can just print out that page, post it somewhere, share it with someone. And then we're going to go through some of this exercise, but you can be the leader of the same workshop with your group by taking this and walking through all of these words with your team. And then we have, as we said, some of our suggested wording based on what we currently understand and knowing that these might change in the future. And we've got some quotes that you could share. You could also print this up and put it up in your clinic if you want to share with families. And then also some things that we won't have time to touch on today, but we welcome any questions that you have in the Q&A about other ways to create a more neurodiversity affirming environment in your workplace or organization. Yeah, and then this page we will come back to because we will ask you to come back to this at the end of this talk. Okay, pass it on to you, Sarah and Mac.
Thank you. So we're going to get interactive again, and we're going to now have a try at maybe thinking about some alternative terminology. And so we've chosen a few different examples that we, the three of us, are particularly passionate and feel strongly about. And the first one is the use of high functioning and low functioning as labels, typically historically used to describe autistic experience. So I invite you now in the chat to either share your reflections about why these terms may be problematic, or any suggestions you have of alternative terminology we could use instead of describing an individual as high functioning or low functioning within their neurodevelopmental disability.
I think we have a hand up from Krista, Sarah.
Oh, great. Thanks.
Hi.
Hi, Krista. Hi.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, so I'm wondering if anyone has any ideas of alternative terminology we could use instead of high functioning and low functioning when we're describing the autistic experience.
I would use the words that the person chooses. Like just actually use the descriptive words, because that high functioning and low functioning, what does that even mean?
Absolutely, yes.
It's very unclear.
Yeah, it's not descriptive at all. Thank you for sharing that. Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks.
In the chat, yep, lots of people saying better to be more specific about what we're discussing. What's it reflective of? It's Armanzo has written it's a misnomer, a mismatch is expectations of others. Yeah, absolutely. Someone suggested describing the adaptive support needs required instead. And Kate said high-low support needs, or being specific about the support needs. Support needs, helpful adaptations, thank you. Yeah, so I can see everyone's already thinking about, that this is not descriptive and it doesn't really tell us anything, and that actually what's much more helpful is to describe what someone needs in terms of support. And yes, Michelle, needs change across setting and over time, very important one. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. And Charmaine, I don't use these terms, but I would indicate severity levels. All right, thank you. Thank you for sharing. So I think lots of a common, Krista, thank you. I like to refer to my brain as sticky. Yes, thank you for sharing. So yeah, there seems to be a lot of consensus here about these terms. Fantastic. So some of the thoughts that we had to talk about this, if we just finding my next note. Sorry, yeah, if we can have the next slide, please. Thank you. So yeah, challenge with high functioning and low functioning. They're binary and they are completely undescriptive. There's also no agreed criteria of how or what someone should be doing to meet a label of high functioning versus low functioning. As Michelle said, they're not static. Our functioning is not static for any of us, and it is completely context dependent, and it changes across our lifetime. So we all have skills and areas of our daily living that we are stronger at than others. All of us need help with some areas of our life, with some things we have to do. I get an accountant because I can't do my tax return. You know, we all have different strengths. And furthermore, you know, functioning also depends, it can change within the moment, and it depends so much on external factors. I made sure that I had a really good sleep last night because I wanted to make sure that I could do my best today. If I'd had a poor night's sleep, I would probably be struggling with this presentation a bit more than I would on a day when I'd had a really good sleep. And so, you know, describing anyone as high functioning or labeling or trying to put us as human beings into these very distinct binary categories is just completely unhelpful. We have some more quotes here. Laura Tizonek is an autistic advocate, and she wrote that, you know, the difference between high functioning autism and low functioning autism is that high functioning means your deficits are ignored and low functioning means that your assets are ignored. And so again, when we think about how language affects thought, if this is being read in a report and someone is reading a new incoming student to the school as having high functioning autism, maybe some of those expectations for them are going to be unrealistic in terms of where they might need specific support in school. And the same with the low functioning. Is this a child that therefore doesn't get much support or extra help because they're seeing that they're not going to be able to make much progress? We are minimizing their expectation and their potential with these labels. One of the parents we spoke to provided a really great quote that we all loved. So she said, apples and oranges are both fruit. One is not more fruit than the other. And so likewise, autism is autism, and you're not more or less autistic. And there's a book we reference at the end by a teen who's written a book about the survival guide to being on the spectrum, Sienna. And she also says very, very, very simply, you're either autistic or you're not. So I think this is a really great example of that we still see these terms out there. They're still being used both in information, written information, and in discussions about autistic people in particular. And it's definitely time to move away from them into something that's much more objective and, most importantly, can help a person to be better understood in terms of what their strengths are and where they may need some support to grow in the areas that they want to grow in. And now Mac's going to share a little bit about her experience and how that relates to why these are not useful terms.
Yeah, so something that has been developed that is really beneficial to further understanding and giving a more holistic picture that looks more at different specific traits and experiences is the autism color wheel. And it's a more descriptive alternative than the binary of like high-low functioning, high-low support needs, because it actually looks at traits. But the one thing is that it still does not address context. So you can see that in this next slide here. If we look at just like who I look like as a person on my day-to-day life when I'm doing an assessment, when I'm interacting with clinicians, when people are observing me, I look like a high-functioning autistic. That's what people who aren't members of the community who still use functioning labels would identify me as, but this erases a lot of the immense amount of work that I do, and also the ways in which my masking, which reduces the visibly autistic characteristics about me, impact me in different ways. So when I'm in environments that are formatted for neurotypicals, for the neuromajority, we have this color wheel on the left. You can see that my sensory processing is really elevated, which means the further from the center, the more like levels that there are, the more present that trait is, that characteristic is. So my sensory processing is really, really difficult at in these environments. I am very sensitive to sound, very sensitive to light, very easily overwhelmed. This impacts my emotional regulation. I'm much more likely to have a shutdown or a meltdown in these spaces. And my anxiety is significantly impacted by all of these things. And my capacity is much lower. But alternatively, on the right, when I'm with my neurotypical friends, with my neurodivergent therapist, when I'm in my lab space, when I'm in my own room by myself, in my like spaces that were created for people like me, by people like me, I'm less impacted by my sensory processing. You can see it's 2 ticks lower. I'm actually able to be aware of where my body is. My interoception is really, really heavily impacted when I am in neurotypical spaces. When I am in these neuroaffirming spaces, I'm able to actually check in with my body more. I get hunger cues. I get cues that I'm thirsty, which I just don't get when and that I'm in pain, that I don't get when I am in neurotypical spaces, because so much of my cognitive energy is being put towards performing neurotypicality. I'm able to regulate my emotions more, and much better. I'm able to stim. I'm able to rock. I'm able to do all of these things, take breaks, ask for things that I need in these spaces. That makes me so much more comfortable. And this is shown also in reduced anxiety and meltdowns and shutdowns for me. But I actually present with more present speech, autistic speech patterns. Because I am more comfortable, because I am not modifying my cadence of speech, I'm not changing the way that I interact with people. I normally operate in a short story sharing model of communication, which is when someone shares an experience rather than asking questions or engaging with what's going on in their life in a focusing solely on them. A lot of neurodivergent people will share a similar story as a way to connect. So that's the way that I operate. I really, really struggle with asking questions. So when I don't feel the need to conform to neurotypical communication models, my speech changes. I'm slower. My Yeah, I'm more visibly autistic, which isn't a bad thing. Because my anxiety is reduced, my meltdowns are reduced, I'm able to do things for longer, and I'm able to take care of myself more. I'm able to exist more comfortably in this space and avoid burnout. And yeah, I still experience my autism as a disability even in these neuroaffirming spaces. There are things that I am never going to not be impacted by, but I am able to exist more comfortably and more authentically in these spaces. And so you can just see how differently I present in different areas. And if you look at me when I'm at home, I look more like a typically autistic person. I would look like I have higher support needs than people than I do when I am highly masking and pretending to be more neurotypical and less disabled than I am. Doesn't change my support needs. It doesn't change anything about who I am and what I need to function and the immense amount of effort it takes for me to function. But it does change the way that I am perceived by the world and the supports that I get. Alrighty. We're going to move on to some more examples of different terms and different ways that we can change them. And these terms, inflexible and rigid, are often used to describe Repetitive behaviors in autism, they're used to describe different presentations. It's something that's very associated with autism. Are there any alternatives for these negative frame terms, or any problems that you can identify? Alrighty. So examples could be like distressed by change. And that sort of recognizes the root of these behaviors. Strong preferences, definitely. Determined. Yeah, exactly. It's a positive spin on inflexible. You really know what you want and you're advocating for what you want. Selective, definitely implies control. Yeah, you want to, especially when you aren't comfortable in a space, if you can hold on to one thing that you have control over, it's so beneficial. Benefits from your team, definitely. Yeah, there's so many different ways that we can look at these things and understand what's going on, actually. If we just say inflexible and rigid, we're ignoring the reasons that people are presenting with these behaviors. And we can choose to use words that are less admonishing of these people. Yeah. Do you have any more? Awesome. Okay, we can go on to our next one, which is going to be deficit abnormal or abnormalities. Are there any alternative terms or framing and different identifications of why these might be negative use? Yes, for the last one, needing more information and data. Yeah, you need to understand why if there's something that's being introduced to someone and they don't want to try it, they don't want to understand, they don't want to try it, using the ability to understand that maybe there's something going on and they need to know more about it to make that decision. What is normal? Great. Michelle, what is normal? I personally prefer using terms like neuromajority, because neurotypical implies that it's normal. It still shows that normal, abnormal binary differences. Yeah, definitely. You're able to identify this like binary system. Abnormal implies that there's something bad going on. There's just something different going on. And explaining what is actually going on instead of saying like, for example, with me, I'm a rocker. Abnormal behavior, abnormal movement, identifying that as rocking. Rocking back and forth, that is. And saying, instead of valuing it and putting terms on it like normal, which is completely unnecessary and doesn't really bring much to the explanation of what's actually happening, and just identify something as wrong. Alrighty. Yeah, describe it specifically, 100%, Michelle. Usual for the individual. Yeah, it's abnormal for you, but it's completely normal for me. Definitely. Alrighty. And we can move on to our next one. Okay, these are my least favorite things to see ever on assessments or IEPs, progress reports. Disruptive and defiant. What are alternatives that we can identify for these terms? Stress behaviors. Yeah, confused. Definitely. That's one of the things that can be defiant or disruptive. Distressed. 100%. I was going to say that, Andrea. Strong self-advocacy skills. If we're looking at someone saying, I don't want to do that, that is an expression of their own autonomy and what they want. And especially for people who have one-on-one support and people who are sort of telling them what to do all the time, having spaces where they can advocate for themselves and where there's specific things that they want, that they like expressing that is super duper important. Looking at something like that as emerging self-advocacy skills. Difficulty inhibiting vocalizations. Yeah, definitely. That is one thing. Like, I'm a big vocal stimmer. And so being able to do things like that helps me focus, helps me express energy. And I don't always have those inhibiting functions to reduce vocalizations. A form of communication, 100%. Yeah, it is a way to communicate your needs. Another thing that is present is aggression. And aggression doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's the result of other things going on, extreme distress, feeling like you don't have your autonomy. So being able to advocate for yourself in spaces where people aren't allowing you autonomy, decisions, you feel like things are being taken out of your control. Yeah, most definitely. We got another one.
All right, thank you, Meg, for leading us through that. And there's many more in the toolkit if you want to work through that. Mac played a huge role in helping us gather all of that and all the references for that. So as we near the end of our formal time together, we would like to extend a call to action to you. So if you would like, you could use that page in the toolkit or any piece of paper or writing device that you prefer. And we'd really love if you can go through it and reflect on the rest of the list of the words in the toolkit. Bring back what you've learned to your team, share the toolkit if appropriate, and then identify at least one thing that you think can be improved in your clinic or work setting. It could be a process or something in the environment to better support neurodivergent individuals, because I'm sure even with the best work, there are still things that we can make better, and really want you to commit to that item that you've identified and create an action plan for change. And if you would like, you could always then email us if something goes really well. We hope that we're able to have a space to share more of these stories, and through updating our toolkit that we would have a way to share some of your successes and recommendations with others as well. And that is all for the formal part of our presentation. I've got a little summary for you up here of what we covered together today. We're so grateful for your time, and what a great group, such active participation, which really made this all the more fun for us and gave me a chance to see how impressively nimble Mac is in responding to your responses. I would not have done half as well. And we've got our email there if you have any feedback or questions you want to share with us.
Thank you. I just had an interesting question that someone directed at me, knowing that I was a director of instruction in Surrey School District. I'm also on the audit team for the Ministry of Ed and Childcare, so I actually go to districts and perform inclusive ed audits. And so the question that was asked of me was, is distress going to be enough to get the support that the child needs? And I think this is an important conversation to have. And, I at the same time, we have been teaching something that's called the low arousal approach, but we prefer to refer to it as managing distressed behavior. And so it's a way to be proactive and reflective of one's actions when you're engaging in a situation where a child or youth or adult may become distressed. So that is always on the tip of my tongue as a word to use. And so I really appreciate this shift. One of the things we talk about when we do the low arousal training or the managing distress behavior is that this is not fun for this person, so I just get incensed when I see people use language like he's just being defiant or he's in control of his actions, or as was said earlier, oh, he looked really angry. Well, you don't know if he was angry or fearful or distressed or tired or anxious, and people put all of these terms that imply that somebody's in complete control of their actions. And the reality is, when somebody's having a meltdown, they've got no control over their actions at that point. That's the time they have no ability, and their frontal lobe is popping off. So this was super, super useful. Really grateful to you guys for bringing this topic. So great to see so many practitioners that were in this community of learners and working alongside and asking these important questions. I think, the thing that I cannot stress enough is describe what that behavior is, describe what that need is specifically, in an objective manner, so that there isn't room for those interpretations or misinterpretations. Yeah. Anything else that people would like to add? And I see that Krista has noted in chat. Yeah, sadly, Krista, she's writing exactly. Can you say that to some people that are all labeling me that way? I don't know if I could control my tone of voice. And I think, that's a piece for everybody to really to listen to. One of the examples that I've given a lot is that when you are lost and you're trying to find your way to a location and you're driving in your car, do you turn down your radio, for example, right? To talk about that sensory overload and the need to just be safe and take care of oneself. So thank you. Yeah, I think if there are no other questions, we can wrap things up. I know that people have really busy lives, and you guys have extremely busy lives. And so I will just end by,
Hello, sorry.
yes, sorry, Krista, go
I didn't
ahead.
want to interrupt you, but you were about to say goodbye, so
Yeah, no,
okay.
Krista, go ahead. You've got,
How do I know there's like a community of like individuals, autistic families, neurodivergent, but I don't know how to get into it. Like, how do I access that?
how do you access the community? So,
Yes, like the wider community.
do one of the presenters, would you like to respond back, perhaps?
There is the North Shore Women's Center has a support group for neurodivergent people. And yeah, just doing research on your community. There's a lot of Facebook groups. There's
Yeah.
so
I guess, sorry, I should be more specific, but I don't want to take up everybody's time but I have way too much time because I'm not working, and that's because I have an energy limiting chronic illness, and people won't believe me, and I'm just getting kicked out of everywhere, and I'm just trying to like color and grieve my cats, and like for the first time not hate myself. Like, somebody please reach out to me. Thanks. I can like give my email or something.
Krista, can you would you be comfortable emailing me directly? I'll just put my email into chat.
Yeah, thank you.
I have some ideas.
Okay.
And I'm sorry you're going through that.
Me too.
So my email's in chat. Drop me a line.
Okay.
Okay,
I'll try and keep it to a line.
it's okay. You can drop a few lines.
Thank
It's
you.
all good. That's what we're here for.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Michelle,
Okay,
what the
yes.
question you had mentioned at the beginning, I might have missed it and was distracted. Was it answered, the question around like we're advocating for this change in language, but sometimes what families need to advocate for school and support is different? Did we have a chance to
Well,
answer?
I think that people need to just really focus on the explanation of what it is that is needed, right? Yeah, I mean, I think we need a shift from this pathologizing that we historically do. And I think that the more um, we can have conversations like this, the more that is going to improve. Did you want
Yeah.
to add to that?
Well, I know Sarah and Mac and I have had conversations. I think Mac and Sarah will have some things contribute too, but I do recognize that that is a very real reality. Like when we had that conversation among our team about that high and low functioning slide, we did recognize that there are still some spaces where for advocacy for children and youth that we do have to be aware of our language. And I agree with you, Michelle. It is really a balancing of both. And I think a lot of the families quotes highlighted that while we can, accurately share the needs of that person, we could also balance that in the context of who they are and what their strengths are, which I think is then a place where the school gets the information that they need, but we also recognize the child and youth as the person, the whole person that they are.
Yeah.
I don't know, Sarah and Mac, I know you have good insight on that too.
Yeah, not exclusively seeing when you're reporting on a child, not exclusively reporting areas where they're struggling, I think is really beneficial. Because you can use those strengths as ways to connect. Like, for me, working with people, like knowing that they're specifically interested in certain things or they're really good at science and trying to use that interest and that passion to help areas where they're struggling. And I think exclusively looking in a negative frame is not going to benefit anyone. Yeah, as a care provider, it's really important for me to know different areas that are helpful. And yeah, yeah, that's sort of my main thing is just like looking at people and not exclusively reporting on their deficits and where they're struggling. Yeah.
I think also, considering the order in which we put things, be it in a conversational feedback, be it a report, making that shift to make sure that, that first page or that first piece you say is describing that person for them as a whole. This child is their strengths. I always include their likes. What do they like doing? They love Peppa Pig or they're really into soccer, making sure that we're describing a human first and those strengths first, all the really fantastic positive things that we have seen and can describe that will be there. And then, when we then move on to describe the challenges and those very real disabilities that are being experienced, I think also communication there as well with parents, letting them know, a portion of this report might be harder for you to read because in order for us to make sure that your child accesses the services they need, I do need to make sure that I'm describing the challenges that they have. And then as we describe those challenges, bringing in this more neutral language is going to make that easier for that parent to read. But we also, as we said, we still have to make sure that we don't want to like avoid using like describing some things because we want to make sure it's a very positive report because then we're actually not advocating for that child either. So I think the more neutral language we can use and actually just letting parents know, I am going to have this area of the report where I'm going to describe what's really challenging for your child right now so that we can make things easier for them.
Thanks. I appreciate you talking about the strengths piece. Because again, that's a thing that we try to reinforce in schools. People spend a lot of time doing things with kids or having kids do things that they're not necessarily very good at. And instead of looking at what kids and youth are really great at and then trying to further extend those skills. So thank you.
Yeah, and I also think an important piece is having an open and curious mind as we work with neurodivergent people and children. I think sometimes, you know, strengths might not immediately be obvious, or because they're not kind of what we even neurotypically see as strengths, right? Like we have to make that shift as well. What is important to this young person? What are they doing well? You know, not this child isn't using words yet. It's this child isn't using words, and so they communicate by using my hand to let me know what they need, right? I think that's really important too, to be mindful of that. And also, I don't know if people have heard of the name Rachel Dorsey. She's an autistic SLP. I was fortunate enough to hear her speak last year, and she talked about, you know, cultivating autistic joy. So again, when we talk about a child or a young person and what they are into, maybe they're not into soccer and coloring, and maybe it is something more unusual, but that's their autistic joy, and we can still describe that as a strength and as something that we can validate it, right? We can say, this is what you love, and that's what brings you joy. And so keeping an open mind, being curious, asking parents, I think that really helps as well to continue to, as Dr. Morenike said, avoid just describing a walking, talking ball of deficits, and actually a very unique human, as we all are.
Yeah. Great. Thank you. Okay, I see Becca has their hand up.
Hi, I have one question. So I'm a social worker at Queen Alexandria Children's Health Center, and I work with some little ones who are diagnosed with autism, and I work with the families who are supporting kids in transitioning to autism services, but also kindergarten and beyond. And I'm wondering if you all have some advice for me on to pass on to parents of how to initiate those conversations with kindergarten teachers and other care providers who might not be specialized in neurodiversity or autism about advocating for your kid and maybe expressing language preferences.
I wish Rachel was here because she shared a really lovely resource with us, but every single year she writes a letter to the teachers and shares it with all of her son's classmates, with a developmentally appropriate way to explain Down syndrome. So ways that parents can talk with their kids about how allo exists in the world. And she always signs it off, we don't wish that allo didn't have Down syndrome. So sending a letter out and sort of explaining the way that you and your child present, the way that you and your child experience autism, the way that you're able, the way that you want them to talk about your kid, the way that what's going on in their life and giving them updates and sort of explaining things, having meetings with teachers is really important. In my high school, it was a requirement for us to meet with our teachers at the beginning of every semester. It was a very stressful thing, but it made me a very good self-advocate. And discussing our specific needs, the ways that things are present, what teachers can do, and sort of explain to help us, and also sort of explaining the ways that things may present. And like, I have a light processing disorder and I have dark glasses, and I was always like, oh, I'm not hungover, I just have a light processing disorder, and sort of things like that. Opening the conversation with them. I don't have any specific resources, but if you drop your email, I can share some language that I like to use in discussing it with other people and introducing it, I guess.
I
That's
think
all
Becca,
super helpful.
You're probably, I think from the background of your work and training, you may know this already, so I'll share it in case anyone else in the group knows. I think a lot of families sometimes just really practical things that they might not be aware of how the school system works is really important to share. Like reminding parents that they should arrange for a meeting when they're applying for school in the spring before school starts, and arrange a meeting with whoever the right person is at that school. Sometimes families don't know about individual education plans or school funding or the school support team or a resource teacher. So I think all of those things that sometimes we might take for granted is really helpful advice for families.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I will put a plug in for a video that we did, and it was another chat. I did a presentation on navigating the education system, so that's available on our website. And that does have content related to exactly what you were just describing, Angie, in terms of, making sure that parents are aware of how to find their way around the education system, and aware of the rights that they and their child have, which is really, really important. So I'm not seeing any other questions. I will wrap things up by thanking everyone for being here today. I will give a haichka, which is a Hunkamanum word for thank you. And I will also give a kia ora, which is one of my favorite expressions because that originates in my favorite place in the world, which is Aotearoa in New Zealand. So thank you again for everyone's time today, and I wish you all the very best as you go through the rest of your day and the rest of this week. Take good care.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.